As Kelly said, I wanted to talk to you a little bit today about briefly some principles of how to bring livestock into a cropping system or just running livestock in a grazing situation in general. But more importantly, I think, if I do nothing else today, I'd like to get you to start to think about plant-animal interactions and plant-plant interactions and interactions with the soil in a little different way than what I grew up doing. And so with that, I always ask people, why are you in agriculture? And there's all kind of answers to that. And particularly if you're talking to ranchers, sometimes it's so I can jingle my spurs and drive my pickup around with a dog in the back. But to me, the best reason to be in the ag business is to convert solar energy into something people are going to pay money for, and hopefully do it in a way that you can have fun. We're having a lot of trouble with people exiting agriculture because they grow up like I did. My dad figured, if you're having fun, you're not doing it right. And so if we can go and do something we enjoy, and we're making money, and hopefully regenerating the resource, I mean, que más quiere, right? So what I want to talk about today is, how do we do that in a way that it is essentially a biological process rather than an industrial one? I love my job and I love my boss. But I hear over and over from young people, I'll bet technology is going to fix everything. Now, I'm kind of a Luddite by nature anyways. But what I usually talk to them about is, what does technology do? And after we talk about it for a little while, basically what we come to is, all technology does is make you more efficient at what you're doing. If we're doing the wrong thing, we're in a Maserati on the road to hell, and we've just shifted into overdrive and mashed the gas. No civilization has ever outlived its ability to feed itself. The Babylonians destroyed theirs in about 400 years with wooden plows and hoes made out of the shoulder blades of animals. The Greeks did it in about a little less than that with bronze plows. The Romans took care of the entire Mediterranean basin in about 600 years with iron plows. Now we've got 24-row tractors. The farm that I grew up on, when I was a kid, I could dig a post hole by hand in about 15 minutes when I was this tall, and go 2.5 feet deep before I ever hit a rock. Today, my cousin is plowing up rocks. That's efficiency. But efficiency to do what? And so we need to find, we are in a great business. Is there any other business where the workers will reproduce themselves for free? The input is from the sun and out of the dirt. And all we got to do is stay out of the way. If we can maximize that part, all we got to do is tweak it just a little bit with the technology. Incorporating livestock, we can do a lot of that. We can help close nutrient cycles so we don't have to have so much fertilizer. We can provide some insurance, some extra cash flow, an additional profit center or two, decrease our overhead costs because we don't have to have so much machinery. We can let the livestock do our work for us. We may provide biological inoculant and increase biological activity. There are guys making a living reclaiming mine spoils in the Rocky Mountains because they can't get anything to grow there. What they're doing is using the livestock to make those mine soils into mine tailings into soil and getting something to grow. We may make weeds a profit center or a resource rather than a pest and an expense. It makes me cry driving through the country up where I'm at in the Panhandle. I'm a sheep guy. I admit that. And I drive by guys plowing up good forage resources with pigweed, Johnson grass, cheatgrass, bindweed, and kochia. That's just a number one chow for me. We may break pest cycles and thereby decrease a lot of our pesticide expense without having to pay a royalty to a seed company for their registered technology for, pick your poison, Roundup Ready, Dicamba Ready, BT, whatever. And we may make more efficient use of water. It's much more efficient to produce foliage with soil water than it is to produce grain. If we can harvest it as herbage, that can be more efficient. Now, that's what we can do. We can also go the other way if we do this wrong. Colin Sykes, he has developed a way of doing this that he calls pasture cropping. In Australia, they say we can't live with sustainable agriculture because we have degraded the resource so bad we can't live with that. We've got to have regenerative management if we're going to have a viable society. That's something to think about here in the birthplace of the Dust Bowl too. If we're going to do regenerative management, we need to use biological and technical tools to improve the health of the ecosystem. We can get a lot of stuff for free if we have a well-functioning ecosystem. We need to provide an environment where a diversity of desired organisms can live and produce a profit given the range of climatic and economic variability that may occur. We cannot kill our way to prosperity. One of the things I loved about being in Colorado, and it wasn't the skiing. I hate skiing. I hate snow. But one of the things I loved there, as a range management specialist, everybody was asking, how can I grow more? A lot of the questions I get in Texas are, what is this and how do I kill it? Probably that thing is there because, we have a PhD in systems agriculture. I teach the systems class sometimes. One of the things we tell people over and over, you can quote me on this. If you don't like what's happening, the thing you need to consider is you have a system perfectly designed to get the results you're getting. We need to start thinking differently. We also need to integrate all the other social, financial, and environmental events to move closer to achieving goals. We got to do stuff that is good for society too. even here in the Panhandle, that is very heavily agricultural oriented, economically oriented towards agriculture. There are people starting to ask things about, why are we using so much water? Why am I having to chomp on sand grains for about 3 months out of the year? And so we need to worry about those things too. Soil health principles are basically to make it a little shorter and easier. Keep it covered, keep it diverse, keep it undisturbed, keep it alive, and when possible, bring livestock in. The more times we can convert energy to another form, the longer it stays in the system and the more good we do. What we're doing by doing that is we're manipulating ecosystem processes. The water cycle, the nutrient cycle, energy flow, and then the relationships among plants. And we think a lot about competition, but there's a lot of cooperation among plants. How many of you have ever seen a grass seedling where there was a weed that came through and popped up the crust, and then the grass can come up through there where it couldn't have if that crust stayed in place? We've got, I'm sure you're going to have somebody probably talk about mycorrhizal relationships. We can have plants share biochemical components between species. All those things can be a big effect. We got to do that so that we have biotic integrity, hydrologic function working at a higher rate, and the soils are stable. We're trying, in other words, to imitate a highly functioning natural system. And in this country, the natural system was a grassland or at most a savanna with a lot of grazing animals in it. This is a highly functioning ecosystem with a diversity of both plants and animals. They are grazing these animals at very high densities, much as they would have done in nature. And you can see the cattle and the goats are doing pretty well, and so are the plants. They're at a high density, but for a very short period of time. This is a friend of mine. This is one of the vendors out here. This was on their place in Bladen, Nebraska. It was September the 12th, I think, something like that. They had planted every species of cover crop they had in monocultures and then in mixes 5 weeks previously. Now they had had pretty good rainfall. You can see how cold it was. This is my friend, his name is Storm. They called this the Storm Mix. Now you can see in the background how tall some of this other stuff is in monocultures. This is sorghum Sudan grass, 5 weeks old. In with some sun hemp, there was, I can't remember, some turnips. There were a couple of kinds of legumes in there. Those together were producing much more than any of them separately. I took some of these, planted them in a sheep pen at home. My son and I mean, we didn't till, we raked the hay and the sheep pellets back, scattered seed, and raked the litter back over it. Every week we did a little bit so that he didn't get soured on it, and neither did I. Used the same mix each time. Every week looked like we had planted something different. We started this in July. Oats were in this mix. We made seed on the oats before the summer was out. Now, who would think oats could make seed in the middle of summer? I ask people this a lot. Why do you get weeds? Why do the plants that are growing there grow there? And here's my answer. I don't know if it's what yours is. I would say it's because that's the thing of all the stuff that is available at present that is the best suited to that little spot right there. I think one of the reasons why these diverse mixes work so well is we got something that grows best right on this spot, growing right next to something else that grows best right on this spot. And then they get to help each other out too. One of my old bosses, this was one of his, it's one of my favorite quotes. Mother Nature is not a nudist. She's going to cover herself up. You create bare ground, she's going to put something there to cover it. You go kill that, she'll put something else you do that you probably like even less. You take that off, she's going to put something you like even less until you quit messing with it. My friend Walt Davis, he has two that I use a lot. One is weeds and brush are not caused by a herbicide deficiency. And the other is, and this is one that I take to heart quite a lot. It's a rare person who can be trusted with taking life on a grand scale. Everything has to take life to keep living. But if you're killing lots of stuff all at one time, generally that ain't good. Sometimes it's because you're killing other things that you'd rather not. Sometimes it's just that killing things on that scale is something that system is not adapted to. And it's going to cause a shock through the system. We got lots of valuable plants in this picture. We got mare's tail, we got sunflower, we got a little salsify down here. I don't know what this is, some kind of wheatgrass or little cool season annual. Now a lot of people would look at that and they would have said to themselves, "Self, you need to go out there and kill all those dang weeds." This guy decided there lies a forage resource. He put the cattle in at high density, so high that some of them are even leaking over the fence. But he's getting that stuff consumed. Now most people don't think of mare's tail as a forage resource, but he did. Now notice he didn't eat it plumb out. He's still got a lot of cover. He's still got a lot of something that is pumping some sugars and stuff back into the soil, loosening it up. The next year, this was in Nebraska. The next year, he harvested 60 bushel wheat off of that. And didn't spend a dime. In fact, made a little money off of the weeds. Now people will say that won't work here. Maybe it won't. But here's a guy, just one county north. He had herbicide-resistant pigweed. He decided, rather than fight the inevitable, let's turn lemons into lemonade. He got cattle running into cotton, eating the pigweed. Now, he probably needed to eat it a little before this. I mean, ideally. But if you're a range guy, a grazing guy, you look at a lot of cow pies. Cow pies are your bread and butter. You got cow pies like that, you running yearlings, that's 2.5 pound a day gain feed. And he's getting it for, it's bonus. I gave this presentation, basically this presentation in Amarillo last year. Some guys caught me after it was over, and I'm talking about this weeds and using them as a forte, you've got a golden opportunity here. Guy caught me after it was over with, and he said, man, I loved your presentation, this was great. And I had some, and I can't remember, it was either pigweed or kochia. And it came up in the spring, and I went out there, and I'm not a cropland herbicide guy. I mean, rangeland, we got about a dozen things that we work with, and that's all I know about. But he said, I hit it with 2 herbicides. And he said, we got most of it dead, and I was pretty proud. And then we got another rain. And I hit it with 2 different herbicides. And we got most of that dead. And then we got another rain. And I hit it with 2 more herbicides. 6 different herbicides, 3 spray passes across the field. And I thought, and you still got the weeds. Pretty much everything that's going to make it is going to be resistant to most of those herbicides. And you could have made money on what was growing there. I didn't say that to him, but that's what I was thinking. Colin Zeiss said this, if I ever had an original thought, it would perish from loneliness, so I borrow everybody else's. Does it make sense for us to go in and kill something that wants to live so we can plant something that wants to die? And then we got to sit and baby it along. We're one of the only countries in the world that doesn't grow amaranth as a food crop. Pigweed. Maybe we are overlooking an insurmountable opportunity. What we got to have is a long green season. A, we catch more energy. B, we're putting it into the ground. C, those fallow periods, all the gains we make in soil organic matter and breaking up compaction with roots and all of that, when the plant dies, it starts going backwards. How long are the fallow periods compared to the growing periods in this part of the world for most farming operations? So we're getting energy flow, we're getting water cycles enhanced, we're enhancing mineral cycles because we're keeping things up in the soil profile, and we're making an environment better for the following crop. We want to have a lot of diversity that is very productive, because every little part of every square foot of that soil probably is a little different from every other square foot, and we can get something that will like to grow there. If I'm getting a lot of cool season weeds, that's telling me a tap-rooted cool season plant would probably grow well there. If I'm getting a bunch of warm season annual grasses, it's telling me I need to jump in there before them and get something else that will grow and compete with them to achieve our goal. And if we're doing it right, we can make money doing it. Some of y'all are old enough to remember Father Guido Sarducci. The Father Guido Sarducci 5-minute PhD in range management is frequency and intensity, frequency and timing, intensity of defoliation, opportunity for regrowth. All grazing is not created equal. You use the Columbus method, turn the cattle out in the spring and rediscover them in the fall. They're making all the management decisions. they're going back and getting the gravy over and over, and they're hurting those plants because they're grazing them too often. The reason for the higher density is not because there's something magic about that, it's because we're following these principles. Grazing that plant, if grazing a plant hurt it, we'd be living in the moon right now. Right? I mean, there's been grazing animals since the last ice age at least. The difference is how often and how severely it gets grazed. And so we got to take that into account. How those factors vary in time and space determines what happens on the landscape. Frequency and timing, intensity and opportunity for regrowth, that's an individual plant. Where that happens is what happens on the place. Those things affect productivity and species composition. We can have high productivity, and if it's all buffalo burr and silverleaf nightshade and stink love grass, it don't do us a whole lot of good because there ain't nothing going to eat them anyways. So we got to have both the productivity and we got to have something that we like. Those things affect how much and the quality of what the animals eat. And so we need to, instead of thinking about, I got those dang weeds, how do I kill them? We need to be saying, I got those weeds, what am I doing that's causing that? And then, what can I do about it so I can get something I like better? Instead of trying to worry about fixing problems, we need to start worrying about how do I manage for what I like? We got enough stuff being carried in that probably something we like will grow there if we just let it, if we facilitate it. All grazing management is having the right number of the right type of the right animal at the right place at the right time for the right reason. It's not, please dear, for the love of all that's holy, don't ever please say the two words in succession, grazing system, around me. It's just like fingernails on a chalkboard. You got to know why you're moving. You got to know why you're moving back. Why, when, where, how many, how often, and how long the animals are there determines your results. And that's why you will never hear me talk about a grazing system. Everybody I've ever known, you know what they call a guy who goes to Las Vegas with a system? They call him a loser. You got to be playing the odds, right? Every once in a while you'll feel an inside straight, but that ain't the way you bet it if you want to stay in the game, right? If we know what are my actions liable to do to that plant and that animal, we will find the right answer to that question. If the question I'm asking is, how many pastures do I need and how often do I move? I will promise you, it may not happen immediately, but you're going to screw that up. And when you do, it will probably be a disaster. There's 4 rules. 2 of them primarily have to do with the plant, and the other 2 have to do primarily with the animal. Before a plant is regrazed, it has to reach its maximum growth rate. That's for the plant. That's when we get roots into the ground. We've captured a lot of energy. We have some stored up so that the plant can recover quickly and efficiently after it's been grazed. Second is the period of occupation must be short enough to avoid regrazing. When the buffalo were roaming around, I get this a lot with my wildlife management people. They think there was something magic about buffalo. Evidently, they just hovered over the ground and they just nibbled around and made everything wonderful. But you read the historical accounts, and that was a lot of country looked like 9 miles of bad road after a buffalo went through it. Severe grazing of a plant, now that sets that plant back for a while, but is it overgrazed? And the answer is no, not yet. Now if it puts out another leaf and they graze that off, now it's been overgrazed. We got to let it get back to its maximum growth rate first. Plant must be grazed in its optimum stage of growth. That's mostly for the animal. When it's this tall, quality is fabulous. A cow just can't take in enough in a day, walking and grazing. When the plant's that tall, they're going to be short of something to eat. When it's this tall, getting plenty of bulk is not a problem, except they're going to starve to death, because it's like you having to live on sauerkraut. There ain't any quality there. We want to have enough leaf that they can get a good mouthful, and enough quality that when it gets into them, it can be digested quickly. And then the period of occupation must be short enough to allow animals to select a diet of sufficient quality. And I'm not going to go into that a whole lot today. This is the hard part for most people to really get their brain around. It was hard for me too. That short occupation time at high density, everybody, including me, thinks, oh, you're going to graze it down to the dirt if you do that. And you can. But how long you're in there determines how much that is. Now here's the other part about that. If we had a week's worth of food in the building, and we had the coronavirus breakout in Lubbock County, and they quarantined us to the building, right? And they said, food's in that room, y'all go get what you want. And there's filet mignon, and there's prime rib, and there's strawberry shortcake, and bluebell ice cream, and broccoli, and sauerkraut, and think of something else you don't like. What goes first? And so for a few days, it is going to be Fat City around here, right? And then we're all having to eat broccoli and sauerkraut and, right? And nothing else the next several days. Now think about that in a grazing context. That animal can go and eat some of this really good stuff, and some of this stuff they'd really rather not. And if they do it today, they've had a pretty good meal, right? If they do that over 2 weeks, about the last 5 or 6 days are liable to be not a wonderful place to be serving the Lord, right? And what's that do to their rumen microbes? Right? What's performance going to be like under the first conditions versus the second conditions? So that's what we're talking about. The guidelines, so the rules are broken all the time, right? But rules, there are consequences to rules. You know, you get your butt spanked, or you got to write 100 lines or whatever. You got to pay a fine. Guidelines are, here's how you can stay on the straight and narrow, right? Adjust your recovery periods to pasture growth. If it's growing fast, we need to be moving quick. Cause A, there's a lot of good stuff coming up, and B, if we wait too long, when we come back, the grass is this tall and everything's going to starve to death. By the same token, when things get bad, we need to slow down so we got lots of time for it to recover before we come back. What I see lots of people do is the exact opposite. There's a scientific study that's ongoing in Colorado. I'm not going to call any names. They were managing based on how much standing crop is in it. We move when the standing crop gets to this low. They had a really phenomenally good year. They never moved the cattle out of this one pasture when they were supposed to go through about 6 of them in the summer. They compared the performance to the continuously grazed cattle. And they said, oh, this don't work very good. Well, no kidding, Sparky. They're out of something to eat. Move them and let the stuff regrow. By the time I hear people, oh, well, it's getting dry, I need to move faster. No, you need to move slower to let it recover. If you can't stay in there long enough, what that's telling you is you got too many cows. You move faster, now you just run out of feed quicker, and you still got too many cows. Use as shorter grazing periods as you can afford to do. And I hear people say, oh, I can't move every day, and I can't. Okay, don't. What can you do? The big thing is be gone long enough. You can do it with not very many pastures. Progress will be a little slower, but progress will occur. Fluctuate your animal numbers to match carrying capacity annually and seasonally. If you ain't stocked right, all the rest of this stuff is just rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic. And then use as large herds as you can, and use as high densities as you can afford and that you are willing to do. The higher the density, the more area that ain't been used at a time. The tools we use, stocking rate, recovery, animal distribution and timing and number of grazing areas. I used to say paddock numbers. And a friend of mine said, there's lots of ways of moving livestock that don't need fences. I said, point well taken. So now I use that until after I introduce it that way, and then I say paddock numbers anyway. Stocking density and then animal impact, and we're not going to go into those in very much depth today. This is kind of the results. This was 2 places within about 3 miles of each other down in South Texas that we worked with. The guy on top, the low residue dude, very conservatively stocked, a well above average manager in that part of the world. The guy below, he was conservatively stocked, but continuously stocked in every pasture. The guy down below, 3 miles away, soil maps, all the cores we took, exactly the same soil. His main reason for living was bobwhite quail. He had livestock to manage quail habitat. They weren't even his cows. He just took them in and managed them for the guy because he wanted good quail habitat. We put in some exclosure cages to be able to say how much grass was produced this year in a grazed situation. We put in some moisture monitors, a foot deep, 2 feet, and 3 feet deep. Went and checked them about once a week. End of this season, we had a real scientific way of checking this root stuff. We took a 5-gallon bucket, plopped it down, took a sharpshooter and outlined it, went down 2 feet, gathered up all the dirt, took it back to the office, put it over a bucket and took a hose and washed the dirt off of it and weighed the roots. End of the year, this is inside the cage, the 1900 and the 4550. Outside the cage is 1150 and 3375. Root biomass, about 5 times more in the quail guy than the other guy. Percent utilization. How many of y'all have ever heard take half, leave half? I hate take half, leave half. Because cows ain't learned to read and they don't know you're supposed to take half of every plant. But the continuously grazed guy, he's not taking even half of what's growing, right? Stocking rate, the quail guy's running half again as many cows. He's got 5 times the roots. He's using the grass less heavily. He's leaving more grass than the other guy is growing. What's not to like about that? The other guy said, I want to do what he's doing. And he changed up and things got a lot better fast, even though we were in kind of a drought. Some special rules on cropland. Cover is king. The hardest thing, I think, we've talked about this up in the northern plains. And a friend of mine who's been there a long time, he said, you know what the hardest thing you're going to have to do with these guys is to teach them you can't take it all. I mean, when they graze out wheat up there, they graze it out. You gotta leave some cover, or you gotta put some back, one or the other. Live root is queen. We gotta keep something growing all the time, as much as possible. Annual plants do not have nearly as many roots per unit of production above ground as the perennials do. So it's doubly important if you're using all annuals, you need to keep a live root in the ground all the time. Don't spend too much on cover crops. We got guys spending $80 an acre on the seed. You can't make that work. There's stuff that's pretty cheap that you can grow. Use a class of livestock with high returns and preferably high turnover, or use this stuff as a windfall forage. It is my ambition in life to finally talk somebody. Lots of guys in my country will cut hay and then feed it to livestock on range in the winter. They cut it when it's way too mature, so quality is kind of low. They spend money on going over it again to bale it, going over it again to gather it up, hauling it out to the cattle, wasting some because the cattle don't eat it all and because you get some weather damage. And I'm asking them, why don't you move the cows to the forage, make one trip, harvest it at its peak quality, have very little waste, give your rangeland a little bit of rest so that it can grow and produce something that they can live on in the winter pretty well. if that's what you want to do. You may need to have only their manure at first to get the cover and the live crop and the soil health. And you may only need them for weed control. My other ambition is, Kelly, I think, would share this with me. I see all this bindweed and kochia and stuff growing in the fields in the summer, and they're going in and drying out the ground with sweeps, spreading the bindweed, making it a much better forage resource for me, but they're making the problem worse. I can go haul some sheep out there. We can keep that bindweed suppressed. We don't have to dry out the ground to do it. And it can be a great win for everybody. But I can say always, everywhere I go, that won't work here. And I've heard most of that high stock density will stress cattle, right? The same people saying that think this is the normal way to fatten cattle. Now that's pretty high density. And I'm going to say that's pretty high stress. These are feral cattle on an Aleutian island. Ain't nobody making them do that. And I don't think they're probably all that stressed. Here's some that they are making them do that. But those cattle are done pretty well, and they're clean and they're dry. They're getting plenty to eat. They're going to move on to something clean tomorrow. I've broken their parasite cycles. I can go farm behind them. Livestock are going to compact the soil. I hear that all the time. My brother-in-law farms. I go, we can't do that. The livestock are going to cause compaction. A baler stripper. And now this ain't, so I thought about, I go watching, he doesn't have a baler stripper. They got bull buggies and strippers, right? And they're going, and there's bull buggies going over the field like this in the track. 22.7 pounds per square inch without count. I couldn't find out what a header weighs. A cow, about 19. Which one's the bigger problem? Combine, it's a lot worse. This is some data from my former graduate student study. This will be coming out here in a month or two. We purposely went in we put 25 heifers in on 2/10 of an acre, right after an 1.5 inch rain, and we grazed it down in about a day. We wanted to see how bad is this going to compact. Now, this was on former farmland that had about half a stand of grass on it. And we left and we looked at soil bulk density over time. Day 0 is the day that the cattle left. We had a pretty wet December, November and December, with some freeze thaw. Now this line, as that goes down, so here's the compaction compared to the control. We go along through here, nothing much is happening. We get that freeze thaw, it fluffs up a little bit. We go along the rest of the winter, it was kind of dry. We get spring green up and those roots start going. Most of that compaction left over about 45 days due to the roots and the freeze thaw. Now it took about 8 months to get that much. But that live root can fix a whole lot of things. I can't get water to all those paddocks. These guys fix that. They just haul the trough around. All that fencing is too expensive. This guy, that's his brace system. That's polywire. It looks kind of like baler twine with little stainless steel wires in it. That's as much of a post as he puts in. Now, it don't stay there real long, but it don't take a whole lot of infrastructure. We don't get enough rain. My good friend Storm, he says, we shouldn't say we don't get enough rain till we start using all we got. How many times you see water running out of a field after rain? Do you see that on rangeland very much? How many times do we go out there after a rain and we're running some kind of an implement over it? We're going to dry it out as far as we're plowing it pretty quick. And all that is gone. That was taken right on the outskirts of Amarillo. That ply had filled up about a week before, and we got a dust storm. And my guess is y'all have seen the same thing. That ain't not enough rain. That is a dysfunctional water cycle. We ain't cowboys. We don't have any livestock. Somebody does, I'll promise you. And more than likely, I mean, think of all of the snuff dipping, spur jingling, dog in the back of the pickup guys, dragging a gooseneck trailer to the bar that are around you. Probably they'll give you more for the lease than you could make off of it. We got to make a living first. This may be the way to make the right thing the easy thing to do. This may be the way we can turn this cover crop that is suppressing weeds into a forage resource and a profit center. Moving livestock takes too much time. I can't be doing that. We need to work those fields. Well, how much time, if you're scattering them out, you still got to go check waters. You still got to go see if there's any sicks. You still got to make sure that they're in where they're supposed to be. How much time will you spend doing that versus go check 500 head at one place and leave? Open a gate and move them into the next pasture. How much time do you spend now fixing machinery that you may not need? There's guys doing this with a tractor and a drill. You can trade a little bit of labor and management for money that now you're spending on hay. And you can use the livestock to manage your residue level and maybe some weeds and just plant behind them. And then it's not, oh, we got to get out there and plant 11,000 acres by next week. You kind of get it done a little at a time. What I'm talking about here is this. Y'all know what this is? Anybody? That's a paradigm. We're talking about a paradigm shift. But when your paradigm shifts, you look at the world differently. It's how you make sense of information. If you want to see how powerful paradigms are, listen to a story on Fox News and then listen to the same story on CNN. If we have a paradigm that we got to keep killing weeds, We're going to see the world differently than if we have a paradigm that says, I got to take care of that soil and try to promote an environment that will grow things I like. Then weeds get, I'm not going to say you're never going to have another weed. What I'm saying is, then the weeds get where they're not that big a deal, because I'm growing lots of other stuff. First time I ever went, well, the only time I guess, I ever went to Gabe Brown's place was on the same trip as the storm mix picture. We get there, there is green stuff this tall. I mean, just lush. Middle of September. Cows are out there and they are fat and doing good, and I mean, things are looking great. Storm and I are standing there and he's talking. And Storm looks down and there's some Canada thistle growing right in front of us. And Storm's like, dude, I mean, because we're fighting Canada thistle back home bad. So he reaches down and pulls it up and waits for Gabe to take a breath. And he said, Gabe, what about this? He said, oh, that forage resource there's not a big problem. And that was the end of the conversation. The cattle were eating the Canada thistle. The other stuff was kind of keeping it at bay, and it was no longer an issue. It was there. If it starts spreading, then that's telling him, oh, I'm messing up my management somewhere or another, and I need to change my management. What do y'all see in that picture? Not a rhetorical question. Help me help you. Bird? What's in the bird's beak? Looks like a little dude in a sombrero to me. There's his hand, there's another hand, there's his face, there's the sombrero, right? When you change your paradigm, everything goes backwards. The world turns upside down. What do you see when I turn that upside down?
Trees and an island and a well.
Trees and an island. Little dude in a boat, right? Fish in the water. Y'all all see that? How many of y'all see an upside down bird with a little dude in a sombrero? You haven't changed your paradigm. There's the fish, there's his eye, there's the little dude in a boat. Here's an island with some grass, and there's two trees. Now do you see it? Now here's the problem with paradigms too. Even when you change it, then now that's the paradigm. And all this other stuff is bad, right? We got to constantly be testing our own paradigm and saying, what if I'm wrong? I'm on a discussion group with some guys, and they talk a lot about thinking outside the box. One of the guys on that, who I respect and admire, I've never met him, emailed him a lot, talked to him on the phone, wouldn't know him if he walked through that door. And he said, guys, there ain't no such thing as outside the box thinking. You can make your box a little bigger. You can get into a different box, but you can't think outside of a box. So be careful of the paradigm that you get. I got lots of people that, oh, herbicides are bad. Are they? I had a friend of mine in a forum like this called me out loud. Now I'm a range guy. And he said, yeah, but you're a mesquite lover anyways. And I said, you know, that could get me killed. I'm not a mesquite lover. I just don't hate it as much as everybody else. If there comes a time when I decide that mesquite needs to die, I'm going to go get the Sendero. a herbicide. It's the cheapest, most effective way of making it dead. And it's, as a herbicide goes, it's pretty daggone selective too. I ain't gonna go call a backhoe and spend $400 an acre. I sure ain't gonna try and burn it. All that does is make it mad. So don't start making your box too small. Have an expansive paradigm. When your paradigms change, your questions start changing. So as examples, old style of thinking, how do I increase production? Instead of that, maybe you ask, how do I increase profit per acre, or profit per man hour? I understand yesterday y'all had a guy talking about he'd taken his continuous cotton farm, put half of it into covers, and plants cotton into that the next year. And he didn't have to double production on that to increase his profits. He just had to increase it a little bit. Do I have resources on my place that are currently under or unutilized, like pigweed or kochia, that may be a way of making money now? How do I kill weeds? Maybe I need to start saying, why do I have them? What's that telling me about my management? What do I need to do differently as a result of what it's telling me? And how can I maybe use them in the process? The New Zealanders I've been to, they've got a way of approaching these kind of things. They're the lowest quality lamb and wool producer in the world. I mean, lowest cost lamb and wool producer in the world, and the lowest cost dairy producer in the world. When they see a problem, first they ask, is there a no-cost way to address this? If they say, not really, then they say, well, is there a low-cost way? And if they look at that and they say, no, then they say, is this really a problem? Because a lot of the things we look at as problems, they're just things we don't like. They're not hurting nothing. What do I do about runoff and erosion? Oh, I can put in terraces. I can go in and, maybe we don't have a runoff problem. We got an infiltration problem. Think of it that way. And then you start saying, well, I don't need the terrace. I need something to make the water soak in. And live root and some cover will fix a lot of that. How do I break up compaction instead, maybe? How do I manage plant diversity and cover and rooting depth and those kind of things, and animal distribution to avoid any real bad compaction, and then to give an opportunity for the compaction to right itself? What can I get an equip contract on to address some deterioration? Maybe we need to start asking, what did I do that caused that? And I need to do something else. Managing that timing and frequency, intensity, and opportunity for regrowth. How do I increase gains versus what class of livestock is undervalued right now that I can go buy and sell something that's overvalued, put money in my pocket, now I'm still producing? Or what have I got that's undervalued that I can turn over and put money in my pocket? How much machinery you got sitting around the house that you wouldn't have to use for this? Can I go sell that, buy me a little bit of polywire and some posts, and get an inventory of livestock, and I'm making money with that? How do I increase stocking rate? Instead of that, maybe, what's the most profitable class of livestock or type of livestock? given the resources that I've got, or combination of livestock species that I can use given my abilities and constraints to use the resources I have. Would it be better to buy or bale hay? No. How do I better meet that? The animals will feed themselves. You know, the buffalo didn't have nobody putting hay out for them. Why do we think we need to? Read that off of the slide. But this is how I'm talking about changing paradigms. We've got to stop this linear thinking and start thinking of, well, if I poke it here, where all does it jiggle? We can't change one thing. Every time we change something, lots of stuff changes. And we got to start considering that. Dwayne Beck used to say, we're food producers who manage ecosystems. I like to say we're ecosystem managers that produce food. We need to be able, everybody now in agriculture is worried about, oh, the greenies are going to get us. If we start becoming active environmentalists, we don't have to worry about the environmental activists. If we're already taking care of business, they got nothing to gripe about. I want to end with this thought. Do you see opportunities abounding, or do you see threats everywhere? When you start changing to I'm managing for something rather than I'm managing against all these things, that gets to be a really powerful way of looking at the world, makes our lives a little bit more pleasant, and quite often really cool things start to happen. We find other people that are interested in helping us. Very few people are interested in helping you be against something.